Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. I'm joined by Eric Peters, as I am each Tuesday here on the Bryan Hyde Show. And Eric, great to catch up with you. The big problem you and I face every time we sit down to talk is, okay, where do we start? There's so much. I kind of want to pick on the TSA since I'm going to have a little uh, one-on-one time with them later
Oh
this week.
boy, via
Um,
con Dios, you have my sympathies. I have essentially written off air travel for myself, which I have the luxury of doing because my parents are dead now, and I don't really have to travel anywhere. So I elect to not go anywhere near an airport.
yeah, and the story. I sent a copy of this to you yesterday. Now I'm seeing more and more people going, "Whoa, wait, what?" The TSA, starting on February 1st, will now start to charge people. I'll just say they're going to fine people $45
Yeah.
for not having a real ID, driver's license, or the equivalent thereof when they fly. Seems like you've been warning about this for a while. Tell me why this is not a thing where we need to just click our heels and fall in line.
Yeah, I like that you correctly characterize it as a fine because that's exactly what it is. People are being penalized because they haven't signed up to get their biometric internal passport. And it interests me because it's kind of a piece with not being able to use legal tender any longer in some cases. Our cash money is being rejected in favor of some form of digital currency, even though the law it literally says it on the money, that this is legal for use for all transactions or words to that effect. And we have IDs already. I've got a driver's license, a state issued identification, and yet somehow this is not sufficient for me to pass muster with the Homeland Security apparat, and so I'm going to get fined, or you're going to get fined at any rate, $45 a pop. And again, it's pro forma because everybody understands that this has got nothing to do with preventing some ululating Islamic jihadi from getting on an airplane. To believe that you have to be some kind of an imbecile, frankly. I mean, I don't mean to be mean spirited about it, but I think that that's the case. It's just about browbeating the public again. And in this case, browbeating them financially, hitting them with a penalty because it's all about coercing them. And it's of a piece with the way, people were told that if they didn't have, remember when in New York, you had to have evidence of a vaccination to have a meal
Oh,
in a restaurant.
the
And,
passport.
yeah,
Yes.
you're punished if you're not. All of this stuff. It's kind of like our low rent American version of the system that they have in China, which is much more seamless because they've already been fully digitized, and you're only allowed to do certain things. And if you do things that they don't allow, then your social credit gets dinged, and you get hit with consequences. Not necessarily the gulag. That's so 1950s. Instead, they punish you in other ways. By making your life difficult financially. And I think that's what we're looking at here with regard to these fines that people are going to have to endure at the airports.
I think you're right in characterizing it as a gulag, albeit a virtual gulag. But I mean, if your money's no good, or if your permission to travel is now restricted, or you may only go this far, or whatever, it still comes down to someone is calling the shots and controlling the decisions that you are allowed to make, or at least the parameters of how far those decisions can be made. Um, and this may seem like a bit of a stretch here, but the TSA Real ID thing, and I'm sure it goes beyond that. You want to enter a federal building? Well, not really. Well, if you want to, you better have one of these because, okay, well, if
Well,
only
and I
there was
think
some
that
kind of repellent that could keep them away.
this is step one. This is how it always goes. Initially, they begin with something such as the airports or government buildings, which a lot of people can avoid. And so they avoid it. However, people are being habituated to this, made used to it. And so what's the next step? Are you going to have to present a real ID to transact business at your bank? That's probably where they're going to go next. And then it'll be other things. If you want to get your Social Security, let's say you're old enough to get Social Security, they're probably going to require you to get the real ID and log into some database and probably have your eye scanned, through your computer in order to get your
For your
benefits.
to protect your identity, right? So nobody will
Correct.
steal it. This is for your safety.
Correct. And
Wink,
that
wink.
they'll put people increasingly in kind of an impossible situation where they either accept their social and economic pariahhood. You'll be systematically excluded from economic activity and from social activity eventually, unless you obey, unless you submit and bend knee to all of this stuff. And it's all done very gradually because they understand that if they did it all at once, there would be mass revolt and people wouldn't put up with it, and then it would end. But they know they figured out that if you can just get people to accept A, then inevitably you can get them to accept B. And before you know it, they've accepted the whole alphabet. That's how this process always works.
Okay, so let's take it one step further. You had mentioned, you get that whole social credit, your money's no good because you're a bad boy or a bad girl. Um, I don't know if you paid attention to this. Did you see the run that silver was making last week going into the weekend?
No, I haven't kept up with it. The last time I looked, it was what, $52 an ounce?
Pushing up to almost 60. In fact, it
No
was on
way.
a run. I think that, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, I know it sounds conspiratorial. They pulled the plug on the exchange. Once it hit about 57 something, it was like, oops, we're having technical difficulties. And there's been a lot of commentary on this from people who know a whole lot more about this than me. But the consensus has seemed to come back to someone, and I'm assuming it would be a nation state, put in a purchase of 400 million ounces of silver. And whoever they were buying it from could not come up with enough to deliver on that. And so they pulled the plug on the exchange to buy time. And, then when it opened up yesterday, boom, off it went again. I think it closed somewhere above $58 an ounce.
Wow. Well, this can be taken also simply as a vote of no confidence in the American dollar. Um,
Exactly.
and if you go back in time, if you go back to examples of hyperinflation, such as in Weimar Germany in the 20s, people who had real money, people who had what would have been considered, a small amount of gold or silver, all of a sudden were extremely wealthy. And they were able to buy up assets that had become essentially worthless because the economy had collapsed. And we may see that. I've read articles, maybe it was Gerald Salenti, I can't remember who it was, saying that it's entirely possible that we might see gold go over $10,000 an ounce and even higher than
Yeah.
that, potentially.
Yeah, it's the crazy thing about it is, and I'm sorry, I wish I could give credit to the person who pointed this out, but I've been reading a lot of different commentators who are very vested in the precious metals. Some of them are new to me, so it's hard to pull the name off the top of my head. But someone was talking about how it's the Asian markets. It was someone in the Asian market who placed that big 400 million ounce order. And the point they made is exactly what you said. It shows lack of faith in paper currency. This is Asian markets chasing reality while Western markets continue to chase paper. And the problem is the Western markets no longer can ignore the fact that faith in that fiat currency is falling. And so it'll be curious to see if this precipitates some kind of emergency where, oh, lo and behold, Eric, we have to change our currency.
Mm-hmm. Or hand over our gold and silver,
Ooh,
as happened back in the 30s when FDR made it illegal for Americans to possess gold. Now, this might be a good point to get into the other topic that you and I discussed off the air, which is this fun little war that apparently is about to happen in Venezuela. And I don't think it has anything to do with, as Trump puts it, narco terrorism. I think it may have a lot to do with the fact that, from what I gather, Venezuela is considering ditching the dollar. Venezuela is a major oil producer, and they're considering accepting payment, as I understand it, in non-dollar denominated currency, which would be absolutely devastating to the hegemony, whatever's left of it, of the American dollar. And that could well explain why Trump seems so determined to get us into a war with Venezuela, of all places.
I appreciate the explanation because I've been mulling that over, for the last few weeks. Why is it so important that we're flexing on Venezuela? And, you know, no love here for drug smugglers, no love here for human traffickers, but I get very nervous when my government continues to operate outside of its boundaries and when presidents are killing people extrajudicially. I'm not going to pretend that's a good thing just because it's a Republican president who's saying, yeah, do that.
Yeah, amen. I'm particularly off put by the use of the word terror and terrorism to describe drug smugglers. They're drug smugglers. The idea that these people are terrorists is just a stretch. It's a hyperbolic stretch, and it echoes of the way George W. Bush back in the day kept equating anybody who questioned whatever the Bush administration did as essentially being in bed with the terrorists.
Yep.
And that's what I foresee happening right now. And it's a tried and true play from the playbook, right? They know that they can whip up American support by framing something as terrorism, but I don't think it's going to fly. And I think one reason I think it's not going to fly is because people are really hurting in this country economically. And the fact that you can, a coin, a silver coin that cost $20 just 2 or 3 years ago is now almost 60.
Hmm.
And anybody who goes to the store and buys groceries knows how much a $100 bill buys now, which isn't very much. This occupies people's minds a whole lot more than narco terrorism. And I think Trump is
Amen.
utterly tone deaf to this.
By the way, there's a great illustration of this. I know some people during the Christmas season are going to be watching Home Alone, and there's a great scene from that movie where little Kevin McAllister goes off to the grocery store and buys, I don't know, he has 4 bags or so of groceries, full bags, and he's struggling to get them home. That was under 20 bucks because he had a
Absolutely.
$20 bill when he went to the store, and people are like, how could $20 worth of groceries buy you that many groceries? Now you'd be lucky to fill 1 bag.
Yeah, I mean, here's another one. Do you remember Married with Children, that
Oh
sitcom
yeah.
from and
Oh
and
yeah.
Al Bundy was kind of considered this loser shoe salesman guy, and he had a single family house. You know, what the lifestyle that the Bundys lived in, what was a comedy back in the '90s, would be considered almost a miraculous dream today for most people who are under 40 and thinking that they're never going to be able to afford a single family house of their own. And it's true.
Yep. By the way, you had an article. I think this one just published this morning. The Last Generation.
Yeah.
Man, this one hit home. I mean, I know things change, nothing stays the same, but the difference in the generations between what you and I faced growing up as kids and what is expected of kids today or how kids are treated today, it couldn't be more different. And I don't mean in a good way.
Yeah, the degree of personal freedom that we took as a given when we were kids, that's been lost. The tragedy is that the kids today have no point of comparison. Every generation just assumes that what they experienced growing up is the way it's always been. You don't realize until retrospectively that things have changed. Well, when we were in high school, I mean, when I was in high school, there was actually a smoking arcade in the high school. And this is the 80s, not that long ago. I mean, I know we're getting old and everything, but it's not that long ago. And the point is, not only could kids smoke, I mean, adults smoke too. And I'm not carrying water for smoking. I'm not saying that smoking is good for you. I'm simply pointing out, can you imagine people were free to make choices like that? We didn't have metal detectors. We didn't have a cop. They call it a school resource
Resource
officer
officer.
now. I mean, just, it was such a different world. We drove when we were 16. I remember one of the things I mentioned in the article, when I was just barely 16 years old, my parents would task me with driving my little sister, who was 4 years younger than me. Hey, will you take Linda over to her friend's house? Of course, everybody did that. But today, that's illegal. You can't have a 16-year-old driving a 12-year-old. And probably in some states, the 12-year-old has to sit in a safety seat and
Mm.
minimally in the back, buckled up. It's just such a different world. We rode our bicycles without helmets. We didn't wear seatbelts. And again, I am not saying that it is not a good idea in some cases, if you want to do it, to wear a helmet or to buckle up and all of that. But we were allowed to make those decisions for ourselves. We were generally left alone. And that there's a dignity in that. There's a respect for allowing people, even teenagers who at that time were almost adults, not like today when 25-year-olds are effectively infantilized and are in the same state that we were when we were 12, to letting people grow up and understand, okay, you can do this or you can do that. There's pros and there's cons. Make a decision for yourself. Now all these things are decided for us.
I really appreciate how you kind of call out, in high school, we did have a police officer who regularly was in our high school, but he was a plainclothes detective, never ostentatiously wearing his gun or displaying his badge. In fact, he was actually a very chill dude. I mean, we jokingly called him Red Eye Richie because, he would confiscate stuff that might
Yep.
cause red eyes from the kids. But he was a very stand-up dude. There was nothing aggressive, and yet, today you got Officer Hut Hut Hut,
Oh
and
yeah.
parents who say, "Oh, I don't know if I like my kids, having to be schooled in an armed environment." What's he going to tell you? Well, this is for my protection and yours.
Sure.
But if you were
And
to say the same thing to him, he'd take great offense.
I think that I understand that we don't live in this sort of Brady Bunch era of the past, but I also don't think we live in this hystericized environment that they're presenting to us, where there's shoot ups all the time and you have to worry. Yes, these things happen, but they're statistically anomalous and very rare. They get a lot of media coverage because we have 24/7 coverage, which we didn't have back then, of everything that happens in every small town across the entire United States. So, I think that they're inculcating in kids this mindset of fear. You can't, the door's locked. You have to push a button and allow and be let in. You have to have a name tag. You have to sign in. I mean, it's like being in a prison. And I think, young people doing that to their forming brains and their sense of the world and whether the world is a scary place or a not scary place, I think it's on balance a very pernicious thing that's being done to them. And I frankly think it's being done deliberately.
It was really interesting. A year ago, last summer, I had my 40-year high school reunion. And we walked back through the high school, kind of see how things had changed. And I remember when we moved back to where I had graduated from high school, I took my kids to show them, yeah, this is where I went to school. And they're like, is it different? I said, yeah, it looks like a prison now. We
Yep.
didn't have a big, 8 foot tall chain link fence and cameras everywhere. And, walking in the school, sign after sign after sign, this is forbidden, this is verboten. I mean, they weren't in German, but they might as well have been. But the big thing they were really concerned about was no vaping. Apparently, kids sneaking into the bathroom to vape was
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the big deal now.
Yeah, yeah, and this stuff is writ large across our entire society. Grown men now can't choose to ride a motorcycle in many states without a helmet on. This indignity that's being of being a 40 or 50 or 60-year old guy and being told you got to do this for safety. It's not about the safety. It's about trying to parent a grown adult. You have no business doing that. Other people who are grown adults have the right to make their own decisions about such things, and we've lost sight of that, I think.
Here, here. Anything else on your radar screen that you'd like to touch on today? I mean, I don't want to make it sound like we're just here to complain. I think we're probably voicing concerns over the things that most alarm us. You seen anything that encourages you as of late?
Boy, that's a tough one. I
I
mean,
know.
well, just this is just a general comment. I think, and this is goes back all the way to COVID. I think the great blessing that has arisen as a result of all of these things is an increasing awareness and skepticism about what the authorities and the state and the government tell us. You and I can remember when people were, I think, much more accepting of authority. If the government told you that such and such was for a good thing, let's say a drug, well, most people were like, okay, they just kind of went to the doctor, and if the doctor said, well, this is part of the vaccine schedule for your kid, they'd say, okay, fine, whatever, give my kid the vaccine. People are now doing due diligence again. They're looking into things for themselves as opposed to just taking at face value what they're told. And I think that's marvelous. I think the way we get out of this again is by exercising this brain, that we have here that God gave us to evaluate the world and what we hear and whether it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, to ask questions. Well, why? Why should I do this thing that you're telling me I ought to do? I'd like to have an explanation that makes some sense to me. Don't just tell me I have to do this because you say so.
And this, okay, I'm going to step on the soapbox for a moment here. This is why I come back to this over and over again. I know you do as well. You've got to take responsibility for your worldview. You can't wait for someone to spoon feed it to you or barf it into your mouth like you're a baby bird. And it's not that there aren't plenty of people out there, in the legacy media and even in the alternative media willing to do your thinking for you. But if you let somebody else do your thinking for you, you will be misled. And that doesn't
Absolutely.
mean you have all the answers, immediately, but if you know how to ask the right questions, you're going to be a lot tougher to fool. And I'm just putting it out there. If there was ever a time to become tough to fool, this is the time.
Yeah. Be inquisitive, ask questions. Don't be passive in anything, whether it's your own intellectual development or any activity that you choose to partake in. I get on my soapbox a lot with regard to driving. Don't be passive behind the wheel. Be somebody who's in the game and paying attention and controlling the car. You don't want to be a meat sack. What kind of a way is it to go through life just sort of sitting there like a lump, whether you're in the driver's seat or behind a desk, just waiting to be told what to do by somebody who, frankly, doesn't care about you at all, other than in the extent that they can control you?
Yep. Well, this is the thing though. Life is so much easier when you have no responsibility. And in fact, I'll just come right out and say it. Maybe being a slave in that sense isn't so bad. Somebody makes all the tough decisions, you show up, you do your job, you collect a paycheck, you go home and watch TV, get high or eat food or whatever. But life is pretty good, but you don't have to take any of the responsibility. But the problem is the chains that are holding you back, you may not see them, but they're still very real. And I don't know. I don't know what it takes to flip that switch or inspire people to flip the switch for themselves, but that's no way to live.
Well, I agree. And I think it also has a superficial rather than an actual appeal. The assumption is, well, you're going to get good food. You're going to, you're going to enjoy a nice place to live. You're not. What this stuff is being imposed on you in the same way that the warden of a prison lets the prisoner have some food. And if you want to eat some bad food, go to prison and see what that's like and see what your accommodations are like in the prison. And then when you finally get sick of being in your little cell and you want to do something, good luck. You only get to go outside in the yard if the prison warden says you can. So it's important to understand that this is not benevolent. And yeah, it takes a little bit more effort to make your own decisions and to be responsible for yourself, but you absolutely will be happier if you do those things.
And I would add to it, it's not even just this isn't strictly about just pushing back against authority, but also if you hadn't noticed, there are a lot of people out there who are very good at agitating and trying to inflame passions and anger and fear in the public. And if you're not actively thinking for yourself, it's very easy for them to hook you without you
Very
even
well.
realizing that they were fishing for you in the first place.
Yeah, and particularly now in the times that we live in, everything is hyperbolicized, if that's even a word, hystericized. Even the weather. It's no longer, oh, we might get some snow tomorrow. It's always some bomb cyclone apocalypse thing that throws everybody into a total panic. I mean, it's funny, but it isn't. You see people like rushing to the store frantically to get bread and milk because it might snow tomorrow. It's out of hand. Don't listen to these people. Don't be scared. Life is not scary. We do not live in apocalyptic times, except insofar as the government is apocalyptic.
Right. And if you want to find some peace, I know this seems counterintuitive, but just unplug from the matrix for a bit. Step away
Absolutely.
from your phone, step away from your computer, go for a walk, talk to a friend, do something nice for somebody. You'll be surprised how normal the world looks when you do that.
Yeah, I like to leave my phone at home. After we get off the air here, I'm going to have another cup of coffee. I'm going to go down to the gym to hit the weights, and for me, that's a 40-minute drive down the road. I'm not bringing my phone. I unplug when I go for a drive. I enjoy the scenery, and I see my friends at the gym and I hang out, and then I come home and then I'll check my phone to see if somebody called or texted me. But I don't keep that thing with me everywhere I go because I don't need to be pestered, harassed constantly by technology.
I mean, not everybody gets to experience this, and it sounds like, oh, that'd be really cool. But when your phone is blowing up so much and so often that it starts to feel like an electronic leash, that's a hint.
Absolutely.
Put the thing down. Eric, great as always to have you on the show. We'll have a lot more to talk about, I'm sure, next week as well. Thanks
I'm
again.
sure we will. Thank you, Brian.